to Deloitte's Debrief Tax webcast series in Asia Pacific. Our webcast today is from our Global Mobility Talent Reward series entitled Global Mobility and Workforce, Time to Transform. My name is Gillian Waite and I'm a partner based here in China, Hong Kong, and I had the pleasure of hosting today's webcast. I'm also joined today by Mei Thu, a partner in Deloitte, Japan. If you're interested, you can access our bios on the left-hand side of the screen. Before I introduce the agenda for today's webcast, I'd like to take a moment to highlight 3 of the features of our webcast console that you can see. First one, all users on listen mode. If you have any content-related questions, you can submit them at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom right of the screen, and we'll address them in the Q&A session at the end. Secondly, all computer users can maximize or minimize each box at your convenience during the webcast. You may also explore the icons at the bottom of the screen. If you want to download today's slides and related publications, please go to Downloads. Just to note, if, however, you're on mobile, the layout will be slightly different. You can still vote, but some of the downloading might not work. And lastly, if you acquire an attendance record for this event, you can download the CPE certificate by clicking the Request CPE icon at the bottom of the webcast console. Now, let me give you an overview of the topics we'll discuss this afternoon. We'll start with an overview, reimagining global mobility, then taking a deeper dive into 3 of our top topics. The first, from careers to portfolios, changing employee expectation. Secondly, virtual working and talent shortages. And thirdly, the digital workforce experience. And then we'll end with about 10 minutes of questions and answers so you can grill us. So let's get going. I think it's safe to say we're living in interesting times. We're really living history. And this is impacting both HR and global mobility with 2 levels of responses. In the shorter term, from about 2020 to today, largely driven by COVID, when global mobility demonstrated exceptional value to manage the practical implication of employer displacements and closed or changing borders, managing specific and urgent cases, but also changing the way they work to rise to the new normal. And this has happened in the context of responses to a wider disruption of work and trends, collectively known as the future of work. The work done, the workforce who do it, and the workplace where it is done. So you see on the left-hand side. So examples might include the raise in flexibility, so remote working, and the importance of the employee experience. This has meant that global mobility professionals have needed to enhance collaboration, redefine their roles and scope, upskill for the future, embed technology for data-driven insights, while at the same time optimizing program efficiency and costs. This has all meant disruption, change, and additional effort in the day-to-day operations of our global mobility and HR functions. However, I really hope that there's a silver lining to all this, with lessons learned, not least the increased focus on employees as humans. With that, I'd like to bring in Mei and ask her a question. Mei, given these changes, what have you seen as the key changes in your clients and market conversations for global mobility?
Thanks, Gillian, and hello, everybody. I would say the pandemic accelerated and forced every organization to adapt, change, and reimagine, right? It's been the perfect storm that pushed forward key HR and mobility drivers, like aligning to how people work or how they want to work. The potential to combine required skills and talent options and really craft that new environment to work regardless of physical fixed location. So it's been exciting times as well for HR and mobility stakeholders, where stronger connections are now built with mobility and business stakeholders to consider the future cross-border talent models. The more specific changes and approaches have been to enhance employee flexibility in mobility, specifically mobility policies, where it's by reviewing current policies or inserting international remote work or virtual assignment policies. Many organizations took the mid-period of the pandemic to do some radical changes, such as redefining their service delivery team or technology implementations to optimize operations.
Thanks, May. Let's move on to the next slide. Reimagining global mobility. This is a graphic view of the trends that we have. Now, we're going to go one step further into the detail on what this actually means for global mobility programs by looking at some of the key market trends, all against this backdrop of the future of work. Hopefully they bring to life some of the real challenges global mobility is grappling with and responding to as they reimagine mobility at this pivotal time. These trends were developed after a number of deep dive interviews with award, HR and global mobility leaders from around the world. And I just want to point out that while we started to explore these trends with clients, say 18 months ago or longer, they are still so relevant and so challenging today. Before I dive in, I think there are two overall conclusions I would take from this research. The first one is that people's expectations are increasing. This can be seen through things like individuals seeking more diverse experiences, demanding more well-being support, and a consumer-grade digital experience, as well as being purpose-led. And secondly, across the board, the traditional model of mobility needs to change. Even the most basic assumptions that people need to move to jobs has been challenged. Now jobs can move to people through virtual working and virtual assignments. So, in our Global Mobility Trends report, there are 10 key trends broken down to 5 buckets, which is PESTLE, slightly reorganized. Here, I'm going to give you an overview across the 10 trends, and then we'll go down to those 3 deep dives. So, first up, economic in the top right. We have careers to portfolios. This means individuals wanting much more ownership of their careers and are seeking diverse experiences. They don't just want one job for life where they progress upwards. They see their job as more of a portfolio. As part of that, they're interested in upskilling and building different capabilities. There is a great opportunity for global mobility to be an enabler of this trend, and hence to be more closely aligned to the organisation's talent strategy, as many of these moves will require some type of real or virtual cross-border move. Which brings us nicely into virtual assignments. This is probably the biggest disruptor over the last 12 to 18 months. A real opportunity for mobility to reimagine what to do and broaden out the talent pool available to the business. Virtual working was originally a direct response to the requirements of COVID, but has now become much more of a talent and attraction tool, with project resourcing and graduate programs being the common starting points. A really interesting point connecting virtual assignments to another trend is how it's supporting diversity and inclusion. Virtual assignments are enabling people who may not have wanted to do a physical assignment in getting that international exposure. And it can also be a cost efficiency driver. So it's definitely going to play a big role post-COVID. Then, hyper-inclusive workplaces under social. This is about embedding diversity equity, and inclusion into the heart of the Global Mobility Programme. So it isn't just about looking at policies provisions, it's going further. Really building DE&I into the design of your purpose and operations. Getting to the biases that may exist in how you choose and offer assignments. In practice, this will mean, or can mean, looking at your data and understanding representation at various levels. Perhaps looking at how you communicate. And how embedded global mobility is in the wider enterprise DE and I strategy through the use of diverse sourcing, mentoring, and program flexibility. Worker well-being. This is something that's been spoken about for a while, but I think it's really snapped into focus with COVID. Specifically for mobility, going on assignment is probably one of the most personal and major events you'll experience in relation to employment. You might not only be moving from where you live, but also potentially moving your family and leaving behind your social support system. It's also taken on another dimension due to COVID and the increase in working remotely, where duty of care and health and safety of employees and EEs are paramount. This is about thinking about what steps we can take to promote better well-being beyond just a pre-assignment consultation. Challenging ourselves to think, is there anything else we can do? Perhaps like signing mentors, tracking goals better, offering greater flexibility, and enhancing the connection to both the home, country, and business. Next is on to political, and there's two of them here. Protectionist trade policies and immigration complexity. This relates to governmental measures taken in response to COVID, including travel restrictions and associated uncertainties, as well as the ever-evolving geopolitical landscape. While managing this, companies are often also navigating a more diverse set of employee profiles and a higher demand for global agility that is further increasing the complexity of cross-border moves. Some governments are also trying to reduce or limit foreign immigration in an effort to protect domestic jobs and minimise unemployment, although others are doing the opposite, trying to attract people and foreign investment into the region. And we've seen the uptick of digital nomad visas, for example. And it doesn't end there. Other complexities that global mobility is dealing with include digitization of immigration systems, for example, here in Hong Kong, and building greater links with tax and social security authorities. The greater complexity and higher costs are being seen right across the board. And to address this, we're seeing more clients using scenarios. They're spending time asking themselves, what if? What could happen? And that's enabling to think through that complexity and be ready for all the different outcomes that may happen. Finally, onto technology. The first one here is innovation hubs, which is the idea of businesses orientating themselves towards existing and emerging talent hotspots. Now, this is a continuum and could simply be offering executives and employees retreats and immersions at innovation hotspots, or it would be creating outposts, or even a more extreme, fully relocating the headquarters, or building in flexibility to work so they can quickly shift as talent needs change. Again, talent mobility is key to making this work. The other one, digital workforce experience. This is in relation to employees bringing their consumer experience or consumer lens to the workplace and wanting, possibly demanding, personalised, data-driven and technology-first programs. And their expectations are high. They want a seamless user experience at work as well as in their personal lives. And I know here at Deloitte, we benefit from this trend when our clients, especially the tech ones, continuously challenge us to improve our service. And now really finally, onto environmental. Stay on the ground. This hashtag is about seeking low carbon travel alternatives. Organisations are looking to conduct more of their business, including meetings, assignments virtually. While low carbon emissions has been a benefit reduced travel for the pandemic, what we're seeing now is becoming a more purposeful strategy due to other business benefits in terms of lower cost, as well as society benefits, often driven by an organisation's environmental, sustainability and governance agendas, or ESG. And the last trend here, purpose-driven generation. This is often directed at attracting millennials and Generation Zs. So not me, sadly, anymore. But often, global mobility policies are more traditional. These generations are more likely to want to work for companies who have a purpose they're aligned to, that they connect with and feel a sense of belonging. They are very values and purpose driven. So in response, organisations are looking to align their mobility strategy to provide more meaningful experiences. Although, I would add, money is still very important to them, as we found in research. Ultimately, it's about ensuring policies work for all your different employee segments. One size is unlikely to fit all. Hopefully, that's an interesting overview. And as I said, we'll now do a deep dive on the talent and digital aspects of these trends. However, before we do, we've got to have our first polling question of the day. So hopefully that's on your screen. So the question I invite all of you to think about: what is the single biggest challenge your global mobility function is facing? Now, sadly, I'm going to ask you to choose one, because I'm sure you're facing lots of challenges, so it might be an even harder question. While we're waiting for the questions to come in, I'm going to have another question to May. May, what do you see as the biggest impact of COVID on your clients' global mobility functions?
Thanks, Gillian. I'm very curious to see the answers come in, but I guess in my humble opinion, I just want to say that global mobility, international travel, it just got a whole lot complicated, with COVID. So, there are immigration complexities in international travel and assignments, a sudden plunge of flexibility in how we work gave birth to international and virtual remote work. And that adds complexity to talent model and operational management level. So essentially, now global mobility together with talent and HR in many of our organizations are pulled at both ends, right? At strategic level and at operational level.
There's a lot facing
How are we doing
mobility.
on the... Yeah.
The results have come in. So the two biggest challenges that come up is talent enabling and immigration. Interesting is digital is the lowest of that, given some of the technology and that's available in the wider economy. Possibly that's because it's such a big topic or big investment and the more immediate concerns of immigration and the complexities. But I think talent enabling for me is really exciting. I have a human capital background, and that sense of things like skills-based organisation is probably driving that talent enabling response. So thank you very much, audience. We're now going to move on to the first deep dives. So this is called From Careers to Portfolios, and it took me a while to work out what this actually means. But this is about changing employee expectations. And as I said earlier, employees are seeking more diverse experience and skills, so sideways, diagonally, not just an upward career journey. So let's look at the trends on the left-hand side here. So according to the 2021 Human Capital Trends, 72% of executives think that the ability of their people to adapt, reskill and assume new roles is the most or second most important factor to navigate due to disruptions, which ties in very nicely with the poll results we've just had. And therefore, 41% of the building workforce capability through upskilling, reskilling, and mobility is one of the most important actions they are taking to transform work. But even against that background, only 17% say the workers are very ready to adapt, reskill, and assume these new roles. I could go on and provide you so much more data and facts and evidence, but I'll add one more. Our latest Deloitte Fortune CEO survey, was done in January this year, had talent even higher on the CEO's agenda than it was 6 months ago. So as you can see, in this space, there is a huge gap to fill. But on the positive side, on the right-hand side of this slide, it's already on global mobility's agenda. These are some findings of ERNIC. The number one focus for global mobility functions they found on their research in the next few years is aligning mobility programs with the wider organization talent strategy. And again, that ties in with some of the feedback we heard from you. One reason for this, as I hinted a moment ago, has been the increasing use of talent marketplaces or skills-based organizations type arrangements that require a bridge between mobility and talent and HR, often to enhance internal ability to retain talent. You may have heard of platforms such as Gloat, Eightfold, Workday Skills Cloud, and there's many more. The key challenge here is a rapid movement of talent cross-border, which is where, again, global mobility comes on, including technology tools to assess the risks and the actions needed to enable those cross-border moves. So not only are employers seeking variety and adaptability in this careers to portfolios, it's also good for the business to retain their talent, to unleash productivity by skills. And again, all of this requires the skills and knowledge of global mobility.
Gillian, could I interject there and maybe ask for some real-life examples that you're seeing in the market to bring it to life?
Yes, certainly. I think it's always a good thing to make it practical. It's very easy to talk about these things. I think it's fair to say we're seeing a very wide range of responses, but what is absolutely for sure, talent and internal mobility of that talent has become more important, and the link to business outcomes even stronger. But let me share some specific examples as you asked me. So I think the first one on my list is there's more openness and generosity with remote working and flexibility of work in general. Organizations are more willing and probably more comfortable in taking risks to keep talent. So I think it is probably a permanent trend. There's also greater agility and granularity of employee benefits. They're more in tune with their employees. So, and often that's by market. So even just thinking of Hong Kong, where I am today, organizations are paying for quarantine hotels. They're giving more unpaid leave. To enable remote working, they're giving people blank laptops to overcome the data security issues. Organizations are also more open to find candidates from multiple locations. So if a role has always been in Hong Kong, they'll look at Singapore or even Australia, and then locating that candidate in those markets. So working remotely from day one. We mentioned skills-based organization. That's one of the biggest challenges to how talent is viewed in organizations' work. But it's not just skills-based organization. We're seeing greater flexibility in simplification of job families, reduced emphasis on career paths with roles. And employers are offered opportunities to try new adjacent roles and tasks based on their skills rather than the role they play in the organization chart on the system. May, do you have any examples? You're in a different market in Japan.
Yeah, maybe I'll add an example from a sort of skill-based organization. So, skill-based organizations, the need to reskill, repurpose your talent, it's not a new trend to us, right? It's not a new concept, but it has been on top of mind for many of the CEOs, CHROs priorities. But what I would say is fundamentally different nowadays is that our internal teams who used to look after internal mobility and separate teams who were looking after global mobility are now connecting. They are reimagining together. They're joining forces to answer to that greater demand of employee flexibility. It sort of reminds me of a project that I worked with a financial sector organization where they wanted to redesign, right, with their internal mobility, global mobility, and employee performance, so the evaluations functions. They wanted to work together to develop their talent mobility brand for their organization that was synonymous to their talent growth, the movement of talent that served the wide range of business needs and employee demands. So with that, let's now move to an enabling factor of talent shortages, which is our next topic, virtual working. So, as we have mentioned many times here, one of the topics that have been accelerated in the pandemic is virtual working. It is an enabler to help combat and address talent shortages, and global mobility has become a vital enabler of an organization's ability to adapt to remote and virtual working. According to our Q4 2021 Deloitte CFO survey, persistent labor shortages was the #1 risk to business. And this is only one data point. Almost half of the CFO surveyed reported that their business had faced significant or severe recruitment difficulties over the past 3 months. And just in our recent GES conference in last November, last year, 70% of our attendees said that the Great Resignation has impacted their organization. So again, it resonates with your top polling answer. Talent shortages, talent enabling factors is a top priority for many of our organizations. Now, we're largely moving away from virtual working being a requirement due to the pandemic, and instead moving towards a virtual working being a tool of your organization's repertoire to retain and attract talent. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide here that 48% of the organizations are looking to introduce international remote work or domestic remote work policies. And 40% are introducing virtual assignment policies. And this is all due to listening to employees' demand for greater flexibility and choice, and starting to think about the challenges and different ways of working remote, virtual, flexibly, and to make it sustainable. Now, once organizations know that they want to offer this flexible virtual working, they next need to consider how to make it sustainable over the long term. Our human capital trends in 2021 found that the top factors in making it sustainable were related to work design. So for instance, introducing digital collaboration platforms, and the key word here being collaboration, right? When you lose that physical face-to-face, you need that digital environment of being able to collaborate effectively. Allowing personal choice in determining how work gets done, establishing new scheduling and meeting norms. These are all part of the wider infrastructure of consideration for virtual assignments as well. So for broadly speaking, for virtual assignments, there's a bit more in-depth assessments that are required. So firstly, for instance, from a strategic point of view, general philosophy of why your organization needs virtual assignments and which job profiles are best suited for virtual assignments. Now, if we drop that a notch down and bring it down to policy level, you might want to think about what are the guidelines to selecting, approving, and managing virtual assignees? What are the compliance considerations or guardrails to minimize risk exposures? And lastly, operations, which is exactly the point on how to make it sustainable on the long term. So the key questions here might be, what are the processes and tools to operationalize the virtual assignment program? What are some of the roles and responsibilities of the team who will be involved in managing it? And how will you ensure the right level of internal communication and information to be provided to assignees and business stakeholders to ensure the virtual assignment program remains manageable?
Thanks, May. This is obviously a big topic. I'm quite surprised at how big virtual assignments are. Can you give us some specific examples in Asia Pac to, again, make it real for the audience?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jillian. I'll just share a few examples here. One organization that I was working with, they started with considering virtual assignment framework was very focused and specific subset of their talent pool. So each talent pool that they were considering for and selected had specific objectives, and the nature of their business allowed for these virtual interactions to be more than adequate, which is a key point. The benefits of this approach allow the organization to also pre-assess any compliance and governance risks, having selected that talent pool, right? And to address the specific talent shortage that they had and the skill sets that was required in that space of their business. Another organization took a slightly different approach by considering a wider pool of talent, but for specific country combinations. And for this organization, the nature of the business still required that they use their traditional types of moves. So the long-term policies, the short-term policies, permanent transfer policies were still prominently required, but they were looking to supplement those traditional moves of virtual assignments. And for them, the benefits that they were aiming to achieve by provision of the flexibility and widening the reach of their talent pool was to provide the high potential candidates who were not able to move, who were not able to do physical moves, and therefore couldn't contribute to the international projects. So talent and D&I were also very encouraged and part of this discussion because it provided them an opportunity to reach out to now the female population, high potential candidates who didn't put up their hands before because of family circumstances for the physical move. And lastly, I think I would just like to point out that many people tend to think about virtual assignments just as one type of policy. That doesn't need to be true. So, segmentation of policies can apply to virtual assignment policies as well. So, in very well-developed mobility programs, you might see certain policies, such as, the long-term policy being segmented into, strategic, high potential developmental programs. That is applicable to virtual assignments as well. So is it a virtual strategic assignment policy where senior leaders are required to provide advisory and deep specialized knowledge and skill? Or is it going to be a virtual developmental assignment policy where high potential candidates will get exposure and experience on international projects, and that will help them build their global network and relationships? So depending on the type of your virtual assignment, considerations on duration, the number of hours that are required to be committed, of course, aligning with the time zone alignment, and any requirement for an allowance for, physical travel, business trips, and the frequency of that. And of course, compliance-related support also need to be considered. Anything to add from you, Jillian, from your experience?
Thank you. What always strikes me when I talk to clients and listen to my colleagues like May talk about even remote working is how much thought and effort is needed on it to work remotely, whether virtually or otherwise. My clients often ask, why they need to increase their remote and virtual policies and infrastructure. Surely this has always happened. And I think what is changing is the scrutiny and what you can get away with and what you feel comfortable with. So there's increased scrutiny for international compliance and external government authorities. Plus, we're also seeing increased volumes from self-requests. People want to work remotely, physical relocations, not virtually, but also to track people, to demonstrate compliance, fairness and wellness. It largely comes down to risk appetite, and several clients are saying no, given to issues such as data, tax and immigration. The other difference, the other thing I'd say is a difference is what is being said externally in the press and what is being done internally. Often a conversation on remote work will say, a large, well-known tech brand will allow their people to work anywhere. Why can't we? On the inside view, actually helping some of these clients, those external headlines don't really reflect policy. So the headline might say, you can work anywhere. And the subtext you don't see is as long as A, B, C, and D are fulfilled. So I think that image of what's seen in the press and what's the reality within organizations is very interesting. And final point, if I may, we've seen an uptick in the need for quality employee communications in both the virtual and remote working space. And the reason that is, it's complexity, the preconceptions, the media headlines to promote policies and maintain compliance. Often the business want to retain talent and say, yes, you can work from anywhere. And the compliance and global mobility teams are going, whoa, wait, there's a few risks involved here. And it's finding that balance, it's finding a way of working through that. Hopefully that's given you some examples. I am now going to move on to our third and final deep dive topic. Digital workforce experience. So I think you can fairly say digital is the air we breathe now, and it has significant importance to both success from employee experience and an operations perspective. So for global mobility, we do things better and more efficiently. Perhaps it's also thinking about treating your employees as you do with your customers, giving them that customer grade experience. So global mobility functions are both humanizing and digitizing at the same time. Programs that can effectively use data and combine the strength of both technology and people will improve teams' ability to learn, create, and perform to achieve better outcomes, which brings in topics such as diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. Building a portfolio of humans and machines, technology, working together is one of the top most important actions senior executives are taking to transform work, according to our 2021 Human Capital Trends. It's not just about technology replacing people. It's about developing new ways for people and technology to work together. And this often requires the work itself to be redesigned, not just adding technology on top or redesigning a process. So that means stepping back and asking, what are our aspirations? What ifs? What do we want this to look like? And then designing the work needed to get this done. Given the great resignation and skills shortage that we've spoken about, and I'm sure you've already experienced, we're seeing this applied a lot to enhancing talent acquisition and onboarding outcomes at the moment, which can also include global mobility. So what does that mean for global mobility functions? Where do you start? So even just starting with using clear metrics as a function and reporting this through analytics, or just reporting full stop to the business to demonstrate your value is a great place to start. So here on the right side, you can see, according to AirNick, only 21% of global mobility teams do this. But then feedback from the business is one of the top ways global mobility knows they're successful. Now, the reason that might be a difference is from our experience, one of the key challenges to actually using metrics is availability, easy availability of data. And I think this point as a whole ties really nicely into the talent piece as well, which seems to be a big theme of today. On one hand, there is taking action to digitize your program. But then you also need to ensure people have a skill set to support and make the most of that digitization. So with that, challenging May with one last question. Could you share even more examples, May, of how your clients are either digitizing or humanizing, or perhaps even both?
Thanks, Jillian. I'm going to try to share different types of topics or different types of project examples that I have. And I guess first off, I should say, various organizations choose different digitization approaches based on the journey that they're ready for, right? It could be based on their current capacity to handle additional project work, team resources that they can commit. And one approach, which is probably the most natural to ease into, is the transformation readiness to digitize. So this includes review of current operational processes and policies to ensure they're technology ready by some level of standardization and also alignment. So for this particular project that and organization that I'm working with, the transformation readiness was essential because many of their global mobility team members were responsible for separate regions or separate countries, and therefore they had separate policies or guidelines that they were going by. So being involved in many of their discussions and the workshops that we ran together, it was evident that it was essential. And the interesting thing is that because we are now, in this digital age of the customer grade of digital, when we were thinking about this future to be processes or technology, everyone was looking at it from a very human-centric lens. So for global mobility operation members, it was, how do we make it more efficient? How do we automate all of these processes that we have? They also took on the mobile employees lens, right? So ensuring that their end user interfaces were simple and personalized. Another project that, if I may share, is, more radical, but it's implementing the mobility technology and using this technology as a catalyst to drive change. So, like I said, it's a radical transformation, and the organization that has done this actually had, a proper commitment of team members on a, longer and larger scale because it's a technology implementation project, but there was also a parallel change management commitment on their current operations. Again, in these sort of larger projects, the humanization element comes in different places. You might be looking at specific process and ensuring that the configuration of the technology from the user end lens. The other humanizing approach to consider for future users of this technology is then to bring them along the journey, right? Provide digestible key pieces of information so that by the time the technology goes live, you've already almost obtained the enhanced employee experience that's possible. And lastly, let me just share this last project, which is the most common type of digitization project that I see in global mobility functions. And it starts with the automation of compensation package calculations and compensation data management. It can be done really for any size program with 50 assignees or really large programs with thousands of assignees. It also, dare I say, debunks the common perception that mobility cannot provide the required data or does not have it. The benefits of starting with compensation management is that it provides organizations to transform an Excel-based assignee and compensation management to a system-based data management. So having a system where it's a repository of all of your mobile employee data not only makes it easy for the home and host country teams to access, but it also gives you, the data at your fingertips, right? So once the data is on the system, an organized set of data, it can be easily manipulated. It can be easily analyzed to produce management reporting that your business key stakeholders might want, or pretty analytics on dashboards. So visualization of this data that surrounds mobility employees not only humanizes it, right? It for your business and talent stakeholders, but it's the ability to illustrate insights is really a powerful tool. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Jillian. Are we up for our next poll question?
We are indeed. Just listening to you, I mean, it really is a time to transform for global mobility. It's incredible. So thank you so much for sharing. So, second poll question. Which areas of your organization, what areas of your organization are you focusing on the next 12 months to optimize your global mobility program? Now, this time, you can choose more than one. So please choose all the ones that you're focusing on the next 12 months. Again, I'm going to ask May a very quick question, or I suspect my question is going to be quite big. We often hear the cost of global mobility is quite large and limited resources. How are global mobility functions managing to address all these trends at the same time?
Thanks, Jillian. I think I subscribe to the school of thought that global mobility is high cost, right? Because you're sending people cross country, cross regions, but I would say many organizations are ensuring that they are now making smart mobility happen, right? So, for instance, in our global mobility trends, the average number of policies per organization have now increased to 6.2 from 4.5 pre-COVID. So what this illustrates is that organizations are segmenting their policies to align to the assignment objectives and purpose and applying the right level of compensation package and cost. On the resource front, which is the second elephant in your question, I can speak from the market that I'm close to, which is Japan. But many organizations that I'm speaking to are looking to outsource to professional service firms, not just for the compliance related matters, but also for operational support to leverage the expertise and the technology that these service firms already have, rather than developing and implementing within their own teams, so that they can utilize their own time on more strategic and transformational efforts.
My goodness, thank you very much. I really like the idea of smart mobility. So the results are in. What are you focusing on? So people and skills have taken the lead there with 58%. So all these changes perhaps requiring new skills and new resources. Policy, and I think that's a really interesting one. We talked to a lot of organizations about needing to review and refresh their policies because the world is changing so much. And once you change the policy, you then have knock-on effects. So it's interesting that process and technology that makes sense are then sitting behind that. So I always think that people is the most important thing to focus on. So thank you very much for reinforcing my belief. So that is the end of our talking. I'm now going to hand back to May to facilitate our Q&A. I think we've got some questions coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take a look at some of the questions. First of all, I guess, a really interesting one here. So it says, really like the idea of employee focus. What are your tips to start taking a more employee human approach? Perhaps this one is for you, Jillian?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to do that. I think we talked a lot about humanizing and the employee experience, but again, I always think it's very important to think, where on earth do you start? And I have some sort of, having done this with clients, we have some suggestions. What is useful, we all like stories, is to start with personas. And that means creating fictional employees that represent your typical employees. So it's very hard to take the employee lens if you can't imagine who they are. And often when we do that, we'll take out specific issues we want to look at. So perhaps you're interested in diversity. Perhaps you're interested in looking at a specific skill set or a specific segment of your employees. Ask people, ask your real employees, and perhaps not only create the personas with real employees, but get feedback. What is bothering them? Why don't people take up assignments? What issues? Why have they failed early? And do this by telling stories. It's not a process. I've been part of workshops and they design processes, but the employee experience is telling stories. What would be a perfect or ideal journey for that employee or the personas that you've got? My last tip might sound a bit difficult, it's doing a bit esoteric, but a lot of this often requires us to step back. If we've been in global mobility for a long time, we haven't looked at assumptions of what you can do and can't do, and what stops us and what is limiting us. Try to mentally step back, step away from those assumptions, think about that human. I think that was my answer, May.
Thanks, Gillian. Sorry, I was just reading questions as they come in and seeing which one I'll pick up. Thank you for that. I was just looking at one other here. It sort of really aligns to our topic today, and it says, agree that the world of global mobility is rapidly changing. Where do we start? It feels like we're being asked to address different topics every day. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll try to take this one.
Be my guest.
Yeah, so I guess, it might not be a clear answer, but I guess there is no silver bullet, right? As I said, many of the examples that we've given today, people have taken different approaches. But what I would say is that at Deloitte, we often broadly speak about imagine, deliver, run, right? So sort of, 3 simple frameworks for you to think about. And sort of in the imagine space is generally where, global mobility gets to reimagine, redesign, strategize with HR and talent team members of your organization to create that transformation. With global mobility, it's always about the next tier of, how do you deliver and run it, because it needs to be a sustainable program. So I would suggest here that, for teams to get the necessary support, whether it's internal or external, and have that clear plan of, how to optimize through those different channels of support.
If I just may add to that. Sorry, May. I may just add, I think I would just add to that saying, ask the question why. Why do we have global mobility? Why does it matter? It's like remote work. We're often asked, how many days should I allow people to remote work? And I've said, I don't know. It depends what you're trying to achieve. So that asking what is the outcome you want, I think is key. So I think we have a few more minutes left, May.
All right, let me pick out another one here. Ooh, okay, we have one on ESG.
Oh, goodness.
So I've been asked to look at how to build ESG into our mobility program. Can you share some examples?
I'm always
Gillian?
Sorry.
Your turn?
I'm always amazed how much global mobility can contribute in this space. So I think the first step is understanding what environmental sustainability and governance means. It means so many things. I've seen it defined in so many things. So that's the first step. For your organization, what does environmental sustainability and governance mean? Because global mobility is an enabler. It can also differ across regions and country. So, for example, your organization may have committed to reducing carbon or carbon zero. So asking how that is measured and understanding how global mobility can contribute. So that might mean the focus on business travel, relocation by planes and boats. For the relocation carbon footprint, I've seen assignees being offered the chance to review all their belongings before they go and asked, what do you actually want to take? What can you recycle? What do you can dispose of? And what could you store? Which I thought was quite an interesting one that I would very much enjoy. Another place to look is vendors. So do you work with vendors who share your ESG strategy and credentials? So perhaps you take an audit of your vendors and make sure they're aligned to your corporate policy. And then looks at specific countries. So I learned recently that in the UK, there is a policy for mobility for electric cars. So that's a very specific example of how ESG can be applied. So that's for me, May.
Thanks, Gillian. I'm just checking on time. Should we just take just one more? And maybe I can take this one before I pass it back to you for wrap up. So it says, how do we build a profile, or so I guess global mobility builds a profile and have a voice at the HR and business table? I guess I'll take this one. But I mean, really, one of the positives that came out of the pandemic for me, in my opinion, is that global mobility has become a vital function to enable, talent models and to address the talent shortages, right? So many of the global mobility teams are teaming with HR, talent, and multidisciplinary teams, right? That includes your internal tax teams, internal legal teams, because when, virtual or remote work is here to stay, you need to talk about more complex compliance matters. So these complexities have really further elevated global mobility. So, I hope, and mobility, being able to provide those insights should elevate you to have that profile and create that, talent mobility brand or the brand that you want inside your organization. And it also helps with bigger budgets. All right, so with that, I'll hand it back to you, Gillian, for a final wrap up.
Thank you very much, May. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for. There are even more questions coming up. So, May, I've just thanked you, but do thank you once again for sharing all your multiple examples, and special thanks to all of you who have joined today. We would like to encourage you to fill out the short survey that will pop up on your screen momentarily and tell us what you think of today. If you joined late, please note this presentation will be archived for future viewing. If you feel others would benefit from the webcast, please share the webcast via the share this icon or visit our debriefs website. The questions that we haven't quite had time to answer and been submitted, we will come back to you in a couple of weeks. Also, if you think of any other questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to either May or myself. We're more than happy to talk to you. Please don't forget to tune in to our next scheduled webcast from the financial service industries, which is on, I believe, the 12th of April at 2:00. Financial services series, tax developments in China. And last, from all of us, thank you very much for your participation at Deloitte's Asia Pacific Tax Webcast today. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day.